Today we look at how big media is trying to stop misinformation and what that means for smaller social media platforms. This is your Not So News update. Let's dive on it. Starting us off from the New York Times, we have an opinion piece called Don't Go Down the Rabbit Hole. Critical thinking, as we're taught to do it, isn't helping in the fight against misinformation. This comes from Charlie Wardsell and shows how the big media companies look at smaller platforms and what it comes to how they come to the conclusion whether something is true. In the article, they go, for the academic, Michael Caulfield has an odd request. Stop overthinking what you see online. Mr. Caulfield, a digital literacy expert at Washington State University, Vancouver, knows all too well that at this very moment, more people are fighting for the opportunity to lie to you than at perhaps any other point in human history. Misinformation rides the greased algorithmic rails of powerful social media platforms and travels at velocities and in volumes that make it nearly impossible to stop. That alone makes information warfare an unfair fight for the average internet user. But Mr. Caulfield argues that the deck is stacked even further against us. That the way we're taught from a young age to evaluate and think critically about information is fundamentally flawed and out of step with the chaos of the current internet. He continues this on and eventually gets into a piece looking at anti-vaxxers and Robert Kennedy. And he has this following conclusion that really shows how out of touch they are. Mr. Kennedy's claims were outside the consensus, a sign they were motivated by something other than science. Now, I'm a software engineer, I haven't really been involved in science since college, but my understanding is the purpose of science is to fight the consensus. It's to propose a hypothesis that's not well accepted and try to prove the groups wrong. Every single student has to do a thesis for their like doctoral thesis, and the entire purpose of that is that you're proposing something new. You're proposing something outside of the consensus. This idea that because there's a consensus it's true shows how out of touch that it is when they claim things like trust the science. No, they're asking you to trust individual scientists. This continues into a Hill piece regarding Clubhouse. It's a new social media platform that think of it like Twitter, except it's almost like a podcast form. So what ends up happening is you have like a group, and people can get invitations to speak on it, and people are listening in into like that chat room. So in this piece, they have Clubhouse's rising popularity raises misinformation confirms. Clubhouse, an emerging social media platform born during the coronavirus-driven lockdowns, has given users a chance to connect through intimate audio conversations with virtual strangers even while isolated at home. But as the platform continues to grow, the same model that has allowed users to connect while physically apart is raising concerns about how the app will handle the spread of misinformation. Now, it's right now very early on their in their history. So far it's only been invite only, and we're going to get into it a bit, but there's been shows with very prominent scientists, people that have been well accepted who talk in their field, but it goes into this claim of how does someone understand what is misinformation. Something I've really understood more as I've gone into conspiracy theories is that yes, the conspiracy theory is normally wrong. However, there's normally an aspect of truth to it. And really, you see both sides between big media and these like smaller media have opposite approaches. So big media just shuts down the story altogether. And then when someone brings up the fact that is correct, but then creates the wrong narrative, that's how you get these conspiracy theories and everything like that. I think it's really concerning to see these attacks on these smaller media platforms solely because of what we've seen in the last year in terms of misinformation. When there's misinformation, that means that it's on big media or to get the narrative right and deal with the facts that people are going to rise, or it's going to go over to these small medias and that has the possibility of turning into misinformation. That's not the responsibility though of someone like Clubhouse. That's the responsibility of big media for trying to shut down a story. Lex Fridman has the following tweet. It was surreal to talk to Joe Rogan, Naval, Eric Weinstein, Bret Weinstein, Tim Dillon, Leah Lamar, and P. Davidson all at the same time on Clubhouse tonight. It felt like the start of something new. These individuals, specifically Joe, the Weinstein brothers, Tim Dillon, and Leah Lamar, are all really big podcasts. I'm not familiar with Naval, but I'm assuming he is as well. I think it's really interesting to see a lot of these big names coming over to Clubhouse. I think it's going to be show that there's a possibility for a new media here. It additionally allows for the platform to have people that are leaders of their field to try and connect to the average Joe. The Weinstein brothers are both PhDs and professors in physics and biology. And I think this gives an opportunity for them to share that knowledge and whatever thoughts they have on the world in a mode similar to podcasts, but has the live updates that you would expect from something like Twitter or Facebook, common social media. I think what's scaring me though is that people are already attacking Clubhouse before it's even gone fully public. Next, we have from The Verge that Mark Zuckerberg, Sundar Pichai, and Jack Dorsey will appear at March misinformation hearing scheduled for March 25th. The hearing will focus on misinformation. In an article, the House Energy and Commerce Committee have called a new hearing on platform misinformation to include testimony from Facebook, Google, and Twitter. Scheduled for March 25th, the hearing will be a joint effort from the Communications and Technologies Subcommittees and the Consumer Protections and Commerce Committee. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, Google CEO Sundar Pichai, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name, and Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey are all scheduled to testify. The hearing will continue the committee's work of holding online platforms accountable for the growing rise of misinformation and disinformation. The chairs of the committee said in a joint statement, for far too long, big tech has failed to acknowledge the role they played in fermenting and elevating blatantly false information to its online audiences. Industry's self-regulation has failed. We must begin the work of changing incentives, driving social media companies, and allow and even promote misinformation. We must begin the work of changing incentives, driving social media companies to allow and even promote misinformation. Something that's really scary with this precedent is that we're allowing the government to regulate speech through these big social companies. So normally we allow misinformation in your daily speech. You're allowed to get things wrong. That's just the nature of having communication and trying to share information. Is sometimes you're going to get it wrong. What's very scary about this, though, is that the government is now regulating that speech or attempting to on these platforms. Like I said with the conspiracy theories before, it's normally not just a straight black and white story. Normally there's something that's not being shared, and that leads to these false hypotheses that turn into conspiracy theories. I'm very scared that the government will take this to completely shut down mainstream information channels and set this precedent that they're the big brother that knows all the standards of truth. An example of this is what's going on with Cuomo and his the Cuomo Gate story is that he's now leading saying that misinformation is the reason for all the nursing home issues that he's been having, when one of his own chief of staffs apologized for hiding the numbers. I think the big thing going on here, though, is the issue with Cuomo isn't that well, yes, there is an issue that people think that nursing homes were affected by his policies, but the biggest thing is that there hasn't been information shared to the public for people to even be critical of it. So from CNN, New York Governor Cuomo says he should have been more aggressive against COVID death misinformation, announces nursing home reform initiative. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says he should have been more aggressive in calling out reporters and politicians for lying about his handling of COVID-19 deaths among long-term care residents. Cuomo, who has been accused of covering up the true scope of the death toll among the vulnerable population, said during a news conference that he didn't combat the misinformation about the situation enough, and it hurt New Yorkers who lost loved ones. We did not aggressively enough take on the misinformation that caused people pain, and of course, pain for grieving families. That's what I regret. I'm not going to make that mistake again. If you're lying to the people of the state of New York, I'm going to call it out. If you're lying in a report, I'm going to call it out. If you're lying in a newspaper because you have your own partisan agenda, I'm going to call it out, the governor said. They then go into the new sweeping nursing home reform legislation, which doesn't have to do anything with the COVID handling. This is after he's getting there's beginning, I believe it's DOJ investigations into New York's handling of COVID, as well as critiques coming from both sides of the aisle. I've heard multiple stories of Democrats challenging Cuomo on how he handled sharing the COVID numbers, and his own staff members are the ones that came out and said that, you know, it was an issue. But what we see with this whole misinformation claim is that there's now a government official that's trying to change the story, hiding his own faults under this title of misinformation. Finally, we look at the CNN covering of this same story.
Be judicious about our choices.
Here's another headline, Andrew. This is from CNN this week. Governor Cuomo in New York saying he should have been more aggressive against COVID death misinformation. He's suggesting misinformation. He's kind of blaming the media for the newfound scrutiny about nursing home deaths. Do you think Cuomo's been given an easy break by the media, and is that changing?
I think the situation in New York is really complicated. Certainly, there are things to criticize about how the Cuomo administration handled data. But the heart of the matter goes back to last year when the state was asking nursing homes to take in patients, COVID patients, who are ready to be discharged from the hospital. We don't see hard evidence that that made a significant difference in COVID deaths. If you look at the statistics, New York is about having the same numbers as other states around the country. And the issue was employees, workers in the nursing homes who didn't realize they were bringing COVID-19 into the nursing homes. So it's a really complicated situation. There's not clear-cut answers here.
If this doesn't show you the nature of how fact-checking is completely partisan, I don't know what will. What we have here is a PolitiFact editor saying that she's not going to hold Cuomo accountable for his lack of transparency. The issue in this story is not the number of COVID deaths. There's been, you know, states that did really well, states that didn't. The issue is that he did not give information to the public, and that's what needs to be fact-checked. Not anything dealing with numbers. The numbers are really a secondary issue here. It's the issue of a government that's not being transparent with its constituents, and that's what we need to hold accountable to those in political power. And this is your February 22nd Not So News update. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Have a good one.